Welcome to the UNM OCH Health Equity and Social Connectedness Among Older Adults course. If you'll recall from the previous modules, there are 5 primary SDOH domains: economic stability, education access and quality, healthcare access and quality, social and community context, and neighborhood and built environment. In this module, we will be exploring the 4th domain, social and community context, in greater depth. The learning objectives for this module are to evaluate the impacts of social, cultural, and community context on health outcomes, recognize the role of historical trauma, racism, and discrimination on health outcomes through generations, and the role culturally competent and sensitive care can play in improving accessibility, health literacy, and application, understand the role of community support, particularly among marginalized groups, in preventing violence and creating safe and nurturing environments and positive health outcomes, and to identify your role, small or large, in reducing social isolation and increasing social inclusion and cohesion in your community and network. People's relationships and interactions with family, friends, coworkers, and community members can have a major impact on their health and well-being. Many people face challenges and dangers they can't control, like unsafe neighborhoods, discrimination, or social isolation. Older adults who are socially isolated, lonely, and disconnected have a higher risk of chronic illness, depression, and premature death. Positive relationships at home, at work, and in the community can help reduce these negative impacts. But some people, like children whose parents are in jail and adolescents who are bullied, often don't get support from loved ones or others. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, indicates that interventions to help people get the social and community support they need are critical for improving health and well-being. As you'll learn, New Mexicans are particularly at risk of experiencing adverse health effects of social isolation and lack of connection due to the largely rural makeup of our state. Older adults are at higher risk for experiencing isolation. Additionally, it's important to understand the role discrimination, including ageism and racism, plays in public health, particularly for a majority-minority state like New Mexico. Healthcare professionals have an ongoing goal of working toward health equity, which the CDC describes as the state in which everyone has a fair and just opportunity to attain their highest level of health. Achieving this equity necessitates changes within society. Working toward these goals requires addressing historical and contemporary injustices. This is done by helping to eliminate economic and social obstacles to health outcomes and the healthcare system more broadly, which includes changing policies that may exacerbate racial and ethnic health disparities. Factors such as strong cultural customs and beliefs can be a patient or client's asset, while a lack of community resources would be a deficit, but both may require individualized healthcare approaches. Access to supportive communities, resources, and healthcare professionals that understand the needs and experiences of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and minority groups can lead to improved mental health, reduced stress levels, and a better quality of life. This module will illustrate the differences in the way inequities can affect health outcomes based on culture, ethnicity, background, and other societal factors. Our goal is for this material to help you think about how to tailor your approach when working toward health equity among various groups. One way to address inequity is by providing social support through welfare and benefit programs, such as food assistance programs, subsidized home and health insurance, and utility assistance programs. Unfortunately, there's a strongly held stigma about people who utilize available social benefits. This stigma can hinder people from applying for or using the benefits they need and deserve. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. What is the definition of health inequities? A. Disparities in health literacies between individuals based on the individual's ability to find, understand, and use information and services to inform health-related decisions and actions for themselves and others. B. Preventable differences in the burden of disease, injury, violence, or opportunities to achieve optimal health that are experienced by populations that have been disadvantaged by their social or economic status, geographic location, and environment. C. Disparities in insurance coverage rates and health information technology. The American dream myth idealizes financial independence earned solely by one's determination and grit. The bootstraps mentality says anyone can help themselves to financial freedom and independence. Regardless of circumstances, anyone can, quote unquote, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. This ideal is the antithesis of understanding the impacts of SDOH and contributes to stigma against people who need financial and economic assistance to survive. In direct contrast, we know that many individuals grow up without the opportunities necessary to succeed on their own and live in a world that is structured to inhibit prosperity for those facing adverse SDOH. American society historically stereotypes women on welfare as being promiscuous, lazy, uneducated, and seeking to defraud the system. The public image of this stereotype disproportionately targets minority women with children. The most notorious example is Ronald Reagan's welfare fraud awareness campaign in the 1970s, with a false narrative of a woman defrauding the welfare system, one he coined the welfare queen. With this campaign, Reagan provided the public with an easy way to vocalize racist and gendered stereotypes about a person using public assistance programs. This further demonized and stigmatized people in need of support and created bias and discrimination that inhibits eligible people from getting the help they need to survive. This stigma is common for means-tested aid programs like food assistance and Medicaid, but not for other government programs like tax breaks and Social Security benefits, programs that typically benefit more socially privileged individuals. Part of the spectrum of intervention is promoting community education and strengthening individual knowledge, which includes understanding and dismantling stereotypes. By understanding the truth behind welfare stigma, we can begin identifying and correcting these false narratives and increasing support for those in need to apply for and receive necessary assistance. As we've indicated in previous modules, minority groups do not have equal or equitable access to health and social resources linked to poor health outcomes. The CDC calls such inequities health disparities, which they define as preventable differences in the burden of disease, injury, violence, or opportunities to achieve optimal health that are experienced by populations that have been disadvantaged by their social or economic status, geographic location, and environment. Some racial and ethnic minority groups, many of whom we'll discuss in this module, experience high rates of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, and preterm birth. As you'll learn, these groups, called URM groups or underrepresented minority groups, are more prone to experience chronic stress due to social disadvantage. Toxic stress is prolonged, chronic, or severe stress that causes significant health and development problems and thereby creates additional challenges for daily functioning. Click on each of the 3 boxes on this slide to learn more about toxic stress and the adverse health effects. You must click on each of the boxes to move on in the module. Common stressors for older adults include changes in or deteriorating health or physical ability, dependence on others for care and loss of independence, increased healthcare costs, loss of energy or the motivation and or ability to do their favorite things, loneliness and isolation, including losing a spouse or pet, challenge of managing finances, retirement. Older adults can be affected by toxic stress in a few ways, including lowering their immune systems, making them more susceptible to illness, increasing heart problems as stress can raise blood pressure and heart rate, decreasing vision and hearing quality because long-term adrenaline production can constrict blood vessels, causing digestive issues when the nervous system shuts down blood flow, often leading to irritable bowel syndrome, and increasing susceptibility to dental issues if older adults clench their jaws through stress or unintentionally grind their teeth as a stress response. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. You can click on each of the words in the white boxes below for toolkits and perspectives, which offers articles or more videos. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. While environmental factors contribute to high rates of some health conditions, micro and macroaggressions, overt racism, and systemic discrimination impact one's health and can lead to overwhelming stress, anxiety, and trauma, which can in turn impact mental and physical health to varying degrees. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. Which of the following factors can negatively impact mental health? A. Micro and macroaggressions. B. Having more than one child. Or C. Graduating from high school. According to the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Discrimination, structural racism and discrimination refers to macro-level conditions, such as residential segregation and institutional policies, that limit opportunities, resources, power, and the general well-being of individuals and populations based on race, ethnicity, and other statuses. These statuses include, but are not limited to, gender, sexual orientation and/or identity, disability status, socioeconomic status, and immigration status. Residential segregation, disparities in access to quality education, and disparities in incarceration rates are some specific forms of structural discrimination that have been historically prevalent and remain an issue today. Neighborhood or residential segregation, a widely studied form of structural racism, has been shown to directly influence racial disparities in health outcomes. Residential segregation can lead to highly segregated elementary and high schools, which leads to racial differences in the quality of education, severe restrictions on employment opportunities affecting one's income level, large differences in neighborhood quality, including unequal access to a broad range of community and municipal services, and fewer commercial businesses, which can drive higher costs and lower quality of grocery items in segregated neighborhoods, leading to poorer nutrition. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. What is one impact of residential discrimination? A. Fewer children playing outside. B. Fewer teachers working in schools leading to poorer education. C. Fewer commercial businesses in an area leading to higher cost and lower quality of grocery items in segregated neighborhoods. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. According to this module presentation, to what does structural racism and discrimination refer? A. Macro-level conditions that limit opportunities, resources, power, and the general well-being of individuals and populations based on race, ethnicity, and other statuses. B. Microaggressions that occur in larger organizations. C. Discrimination in the workplace, including in hiring and promotion practices. There are 574 federally recognized tribes that vastly differ among the languages they speak and their traditions, customs, and cultural practices. There are many historical factors that contribute to health disparities among indigenous peoples. Historical factors, as we'll explain, have lasting impact that affect health outcomes today. Examples include colonization, disease, starvation, and poverty. Colonization is defined as, but not limited to, forced removal from traditional lands, mandatory attendance within Indian boarding schools, and genocide in the form of large-scale massacres. The impact of colonialism continues to have profound health effects for indigenous peoples across the United States and beyond based on structural violence, which refers to the disadvantage and suffering that stems from the creation and perpetuation of structures, policies, and institutional practices that are innately unjust. Such structural violence can lead to internalized oppression, shame, cultural erosion or loss of cultural connectedness, self-hatred, and a rejection of one's heritage and lifestyle. Structural violence is increasingly understood in population and public health as a major determinant of health. But unfortunately, not enough attention may be paid to the effects of structural violence, as it is often a determinant taken for granted or ignored, but is serious nonetheless. According to Indian Health Services, Native Americans continue to die at higher rates than other Americans in many categories, including chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, diabetes mellitus, unintentional injuries, assault and homicide, intentional self-harm and suicide, and chronic lower respiratory diseases. In trying to account for these disparities, healthcare experts, policymakers, and tribal leaders are looking at many factors that impact the health of indigenous people, including the inadequacy of healthcare funding and access. While starvation has been a historical issue among indigenous people that stem from the forced removal from their lands, food insecurity is still a challenge for many indigenous people today. A 2019 study from Berkeley University found that 92% of Native American households suffer from food insecurity. One contributing factor is the lack of grocery stores on reservations. For example, the Navajo Nation, the largest Native American reservation in the United States, spans 17 million acres across northeastern Arizona into Utah and New Mexico, and has only 13 grocery stores. Limited income, employment, supply chain issues, and inflated prices also contribute to food insecurity. Fresh, nutritious foods in reservation grocery stores are often more expensive, leading many families to stock up on bulk foods with longer shelf lives. These foods lack in nutrition and may be contributing factors to diet-related disease and obesity. Finally, Native American communities experience some of the highest rates of poverty in the United States. 35% of Native American children live in poverty. Approximately 23% of Native Americans live below poverty level, almost double the United States rate of 12.3%. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. What is one contributing factor to historical and current issues of food insecurity among indigenous peoples? A. Lack of grocery stores on reservations. B. Housing insecurities or more money spent on housing than food. C. Poor quality roads for food distribution. Native American reservations have a lower healthcare provider-to-patient ratio than any other community in the United States. Poverty, dispossession, and drug abuse have led to a high rate of violence, particularly on reservations. Native American groups see higher rates of alcohol, marijuana, hallucinogen, cocaine, and inhalant use disorders compared to other ethnic groups in the U.S. Violent deaths, unintentional injuries, homicide, and suicide account for 75% of all mortality in the second decade of life for Native Americans. The impact on Native American women is particularly concerning. A 2010 U.S. Department of Justice report found that of around 2,500 women surveyed, 84% of Native American women had experienced violence during their lifetime, and 56% had experienced sexual violence. However, tribal culture nurtures strengths that can be used to begin addressing these disparities, which we will talk more about in the coming slides. There are nearly 1 million American Indian and Alaskan Native people over the age of 65. These tribal elders often face additional hardships than their younger counterparts. Native elders specifically experience poverty at twice the rate of all older adults in America, at 18.9% versus 8.9%. In addition, the existence of food deserts combined with limited public transportation on rural reservations may leave tribal elders who are unable to drive with limited options for nourishment. Poor road conditions on reservations also create barriers for Native elders in accessing health, retail, or other services, participating in family, community, or organizational activities, and receiving public services. The digital divide that often exists on reservations due to the limited internet access can put elders at further risk, as they may be unable to receive updated information about public benefits and resources. However, tribal elders continue to be resilient and offer much to their communities. Research indicates that elders' social participation enhances education, promotes greater health, and encourages positive attitudes within their community. In addition, the strong bonds between elders and youth have a positive impact on community health and wellness. When interviewed, tribal elders express the importance of being able to pass on knowledge to the youth, both at the individual level and within the community. At the same time, elders also recognize and appreciate what the youth can teach them, such as how to use more modern technology. Bonds between tribal elders and youth can preserve and continue cultural heritage, knowledge, and traditions within Indigenous communities, factors we'll discuss more in the next slide, including their impact on health outcomes. It's imperative that advocates and service providers work in collaboration with Indigenous communities to identify the unmet needs of tribal elders, implement culturally relevant support systems and resources, and incorporate the direct voices of tribal communities, especially from the elders themselves, when creating solutions. Advocates and aging service providers can better support tribal elders by partnering with local tribal organizations and learning about the unique cultures, systems, and gaps that impact tribal elders. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. True or false? Violent deaths, unintentional injuries, homicide, and suicide account for 75% of all mortality in the second decade of life for Native Americans. A. True. B. False. Native populations display tremendous resilience, proving culture can be a protective factor. Tribal culture, community, and environment are connected, and individuals can draw strength from traditional ways of living, places, relationships, and collective successes. Their resilience is built upon through culture, spirituality, shared values, and a strong sense of identity, accountability, and responsibility. All of these factors create an increased level of social connection and cohesion. Resilience, healing, and wellness play important roles in Native American communities, and for many, culture serves as a protective factor to heal, strengthen, and preserve the community. Studies on adolescent health in the American Indian Alaska Native community show cultural connectedness is a significant protective factor on the individual and relationship level, with enculturation being most influential. Addressing health disparities starts with building collaborative partnerships between Indigenous communities, healthcare providers, researchers, and policymakers. Meaningful engagement and involvement of Indigenous communities in decision-making processes can help ensure that interventions and policies are culturally appropriate, respectful, and effective. Additionally, taking a strengths-based approach cultivates and catalyzes health promotion by recognizing and utilizing a community's resources and capabilities. The LGBTQIA+ population continue to experience worse health outcomes than their heterosexual counterparts, partly because of factors like low rates of health insurance coverage, high rates of stress due to violence, harassment, and discrimination, and a lack of cultural competency in the healthcare system. LGBTQIA+ people are at a higher risk for cancer, mental illnesses, and other diseases, and are more likely to smoke, drink alcohol, and use drugs. People who are both LGBTQIA+ and members of a racial or ethnic minority group often face the highest level of health disparities. Yet, they have emerged a well-organized and strong political force, helping pass the same-sex marriage bill into law and pushing NIH to accelerate and disseminate HIV drugs. There are currently 2.7 million adults who identify as LGBTQIA+, 1.1 million of whom are 65 or older. One-third of these older adults live below 200% of the federal poverty level. Discrimination in housing and employment, combined with a long-term lack of legal and social recognition, can create economic insecurity for LGBTQIA+ older adults. Older adults who identify as LGBTQIA+ have experienced a lifetime of discrimination and lack of legal and social recognition, which can take a toll on their mental health. A reliance on chosen family due to family rejection can create increased social isolation and vulnerability for LGBTQIA+ older adults. However, this population shows remarkable resilience, given that many of their experiences as young people were in a time when being LGBTQIA+ was less accepted and even criminalized. They may have experienced family rejection, employment discrimination, violence, and more. It is crucial that these older adults receive competent, comprehensive care and support, not simply because those services are basic human rights, but also to support the dignity and well-being of the changemakers who paved the way for the advancement of this community. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. Which is not a reason the LGBTQIA+ population continues to experience worse health outcomes than their heterosexual counterparts. A. High rates of stress due to violence, harassment, and discrimination. B. Low rates of health insurance coverage. C. Lower income and socioeconomic status. According to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, people with disabilities include those who have long-term physical, mental, and intellectual or sensory impairments, like hearing or vision impairment, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. The CDC suggests that approximately 62 million Americans experience either some difficulty with basic movement or cognitive, sensory, or emotional problems. That's 30% of Americans. About 14% of people experience complex activity limitations in their ability to participate in society, including maintaining a household, working, and pursuing hobbies. Rates of disability also increase with age. About 42% of individuals over the age of 65 report disability, compared with 18.6% of people who are younger. There is a higher recorded number of people living with disabilities within BIPOC communities and the LGBTQIA+ community. The CDC also notes that people with disabilities experience significant disadvantages when it comes to health. For instance, adults with disabilities are 3 times more likely to have heart disease, stroke, diabetes, or cancer than adults without disabilities. Women with disabilities are less likely than women without disabilities to have received mammogram screenings, putting them at a greater risk for breast cancer. One approach to this issue is disability inclusion, which means understanding the relationship between the way people function and how they participate in society. This helps ensure everybody has the same opportunities to participate in every aspect of life to the best of their abilities and desires. Beyond understanding, inclusion requires creating adequate policies and practices that promote better health practices for disabled groups across communities and organizations, and changing such policies when necessary. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. You can click on each of the words in the white boxes below for toolkits, perspectives, which offers articles, reports, or more videos, and case studies. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. True or false? Adults with disabilities are 3 times more likely to have heart disease, stroke, diabetes, or cancer than adults without disabilities. A. True. B. False. Approximately 18% of U.S. adults have a diagnosable mental disorder in any given year. Rising to an all-time high after the pandemic, mental health has become a priority in healthcare. Behavioral and mental health conditions are often higher in populations of color, LGBTQIA+, and marginalized and disabled groups. To learn more about mental and behavioral health, click the pictures on this slide. You must click each of the pictures to move on in the module. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. Click on the word Perspectives, which offers articles or more videos. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. Youth mental health is of grave concern. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory on social media and youth mental health, highlighting the fact that mental health challenges are the leading cause of disability and poor life outcome among young people. Additionally, social media use is nearly universal among young people, with 1/3 reporting using social media almost constantly. Unfortunately, social media can have a negative impact on mental health. Children and adolescents who spend 3 or more hours a day on social media have double the risk of mental health problems like depression and anxiety. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. What is the leading cause of disability and poor life outcome among young people? A. Obesity. B. Mental health challenges. C. Poverty. Social impacts have downstream effects on health inequities and negatively impact society at large. Consistently experiencing poorer health outcomes and unequal access to health care can have downstream effects on society, leading to or exacerbating feelings of injustice, resentment, and distrust. This can potentially impact social relationships, community cohesion, and collective well being, all of which have an impact on health outcomes. Health inequities can have long lasting effects when such exclusion and disparities are experienced across generations with little improvement to the policies that impact our healthcare system. Additionally, individuals who experience health inequities in early childhood may face lifelong health challenges, thwarting their opportunities for upward social mobility and feeding the negative cycle. Intergenerational trauma can stem from the collective experience of a group of people. A common goal must be to work toward breaking the cycle of health inequities that have historically persisted throughout our society and create a cycle of adverse outcomes. Discrimination can be structural or individual. Structural discrimination refers to macro-level conditions, such as residential segregation, that limit opportunities, resources, and well-being of less privileged groups. In other words, structural discrimination inhibits equal access. Individual discrimination refers to negative interactions between individuals in their institutional roles, for example, healthcare provider and patient, or as public or private individuals, like salesperson and customer, neighbor to neighbor, and so on, based on individual characteristics like race, gender, or sexual orientation. Individual and structural discrimination can cause either intentional or unintentional harm, but regardless of intention, harm is an outcome of discrimination and never the fault of the victim or the result of sensitivity or someone needing quote-unquote thicker skin. Discrimination can be understood as a social stressor that has a physiological effect on individuals. Effects can include irregular heartbeat, anxiety, heartburn, and so on, and can be compounded over time, leading to long-term negative health outcomes. Whether it's everyday subtle discrimination, like unconscious bias in corporate hiring practices, or a single major discriminatory event, such as experiencing a hate crime, discrimination causes harm that can affect health outcomes. Discrimination can be based on race or ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation or gender identity, age, religion, disability, history of incarceration, or even socioeconomic status. There's strong intersectionality within discrimination, which can compound the effects. For example, maternal mortality is twice as high among Black women as white women, and children with incarcerated parents are more likely to live in poverty or experience homelessness. In Module 4, we mention ageism as a form of discrimination that can occur in the healthcare setting, but it can also occur in people's daily lives and at the workplace. Most organizations now have diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI departments, to tackle issues such as racism and gender bias, but even so, age bias may not be included in the list of discriminatory practices. Many of us might not think about ageism because even small factors permeate our lives, as we're constantly sold images of youth in the media and products for quote-unquote anti-aging. Research has found a strong link between ageism in the form of negative stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination toward older people, and risk to their physical and mental health. For instance, negative self-perceptions of aging are associated with a higher prevalence for the 8 most expensive health conditions among Americans, which include heart disease, lung disease, diabetes, musculoskeletal disorders, and injuries. It is estimated that the cost of ageism in the United States is $63 billion per year, one of every $7 spent for these conditions. There are ways to mitigate the effects of ageism, including decreasing the intergenerational gap, educating young people about the aging process, and reframing the way we think about aging. In the book Breaking the Age Code, Dr. Becca Levy discusses strengths associated with the aging process, including increased attention skills and the ability to regulate emotions. She also suggests that creativity and inspiration grow as we age. In addition, older adults often become more integral members of society as they age through volunteering, caregiving, and mentoring, contributing to stronger, more vibrant communities. Module 3 on education mentioned older adults leading early outreach programs. Research suggests that these intergenerational opportunities can increase youth's positive perceptions of older adults and the aging process in general, and lead to better self perception from the older adults participating. These problems can challenge age related bias, stereotypes, and discrimination that affect older adults' health. Incarceration is a mechanism to punish criminal offenses, but it can affect the health and well being of those currently incarcerated, those with a history of incarceration, and their families and communities. Incarceration is also linked to discrimination, and incarcerated individuals are overwhelmingly marginalized and often targeted by law enforcement from a young age. They also tend to have lower levels of education. Research has shown that some of the racial disparities in the U.S. incarceration rate may be influenced by state and federal policies. Disparities in incarceration are also evident at the community level, as some communities are disproportionately burdened by high rates of both incarceration and recidivism, which means being arrested or incarcerated again. These communities often have higher rates of crime, poverty, and unemployment, all of which negatively impact the well-being of these communities and the individuals living in them. This evidence supports the need for changes in policy as part of the upstream intervention of SDOH. The number of older adults incarcerated has risen in the last 3 decades. From 1991 to 2021, the percentage of the state and federal prison population nationwide ages 55 or older rose from 3% to 15%. By 2020, 30% of people serving life sentences were at least 55 years old, with more than 61,400 older adults sentenced to die in prison. Research shows that incarceration accelerates aging. More people develop chronic illnesses earlier than their peers outside of prison, and conditions of prison can be detrimental to physical and mental health. Limited resources, inaccessibility, and understaffing of prison health care have led to an environment that researchers suggest can take 2 years off an individual's life expectancy for each year spent in prison. Unfortunately, state and federal governments continually spend more money on inadequate healthcare services for older incarcerated adults. Thus, it's important to consider upstream intervention for incarcerated individuals as well as those in the general population. We encourage you to take a few minutes to consider what you've learned. In the white box on this slide, respond to the following prompt. As a learner, how does the criminal justice system affect you in your professional and personal life? All fields can be touched by this system in some way. How can you propose a positive intervention from your own field of study? When you have finished typing, hit the Submit button to move on in the module. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. You can click on each of the words in the white boxes below for Perspectives, which offers articles or more videos, and case studies. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. When compared to the general population, men and women with a history of incarceration are in worse mental and physical health. Additionally, the number of older adults in U.S. prisons is growing, and many facilities aren't equipped to address the special health needs of adults ages 50 years and older. In many instances, an incarcerated individual's family is negatively affected by their incarceration. Children are especially at risk of negative effects related to parental incarceration, including increased rates of impoverished living, homelessness, witnessing domestic violence or substance abuse by a parent, and residing with a person experiencing mental illness or suicidal thoughts. There's also a link between children of incarcerated parents and higher rates of learning disabilities, developmental delays, speech and language problems, attention disorders, and aggressive behaviors. Consider the case of Marjorie and Julian, a mother and son affected by incarceration. Many families are separated by substance use disorder and incarceration, resulting in breakdown of vital relationships for both the children and their parents. The Medical Legal Alliance between UNM Health Systems and the UNM Law School has been able to serve grandparents taking care of children whose parents are incarcerated and parents who are returning from prison. Click on each of the circles on this slide to learn more about the multidisciplinary effort between UNM Health Systems and the law school. You must click on each to move on in the module. People who were formerly incarcerated experienced discrimination and inhibited access in securing employment and housing due to their criminal history. Certain convictions may make previously incarcerated individuals ineligible for certain state and federal benefits, including access to education assistance, public housing benefits, food stamps, and driver's licenses, which is often a requirement for employment and other service attainment. Furthermore, people who were formerly incarcerated are at an increased risk for experiencing health issues. Strategies such as front-end programs, providing comprehensive healthcare services during incarceration, and linking people to healthcare services post-release may help to improve the health and well-being of those who are incarcerated and those with a history of incarceration. Elimination of cash bail has been promoted by many progressive groups to reduce disparities within the legal system. In most cases, arrested individuals without means can't afford bail and thus spend days, weeks, and even months in a county jail as presumably innocent awaiting a court hearing. This disparity is magnified because the jailed individual usually can't afford their own lawyer. In addition, jails are dangerous places due to violence, medical neglect with high rates of suicide, and neglected behavioral and medical care for pre-existing conditions. Increased civic participation is positively correlated with improved health outcomes. According to the most recent 2023 County Health Rankings National Findings Report, communities that provide places for residents to gather have better health outcomes. The researchers also note that more access to civic infrastructure, like schools, libraries, healthcare facilities, parks, transportation, and community centers, impacts numerous social determinants of health. Places with more civic infrastructure saw not only better health outcomes, but also higher educational attainment, higher household incomes, and lower income inequality. To fully understand this positive disruption of adverse outcomes, recall what you learned in Module 3 about the connection between higher education and health outcomes and the connection between income and health from Module 2. Research clearly indicates infrastructure is the framework for civic engagement, which is linked to overall health and well-being. Most notably, the findings indicate a link between health outcomes and places with less civic infrastructure and engagement, and places with histories of structural racism. For instance, places with less civic infrastructure have also experienced disinvestment, at least partly due to structural racism. Such places lacking in civic infrastructure include those along the U.S.-Mexico border, within African American communities, and within Native American communities. Lack of civic infrastructure can also affect one's physical safety both in and outside of the home, which can affect overall health. Lack of proximity to services like a hospital or fire and rescue station can be detrimental in emergencies, both in the community at large and for individual residents and their homes. Local firehouses can establish programs that check smoke and carbon monoxide detectors and offer general advice for maintaining a safe home. Community organizations can also lead workshops, events, and educational and health campaigns geared toward increasing greater awareness of community and home safety. These events can also work toward establishing or nurturing strong community bonds and social cohesion. Adequate community resources, affordable housing options, and assistance programs can also help mitigate health disparities by promoting safer living conditions. Beyond access to emergency services, social networks like neighborhood crime watches or social media groups can provide support such as childcare services, home repairs, and feelings of social inclusion and cohesion. Lower-income neighborhoods may have limited resources for home maintenance, repairs, and safety upgrades, which can increase the risk of accidents or hazards, especially in older adults. These risk factors make social support groups even more important in places where services and resources are scarce. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. You can click on each of the words in the white boxes below for toolkits, perspectives, which offers articles, reports, or more videos, and case studies. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. Social capital and cohesion have significant impacts on health outcomes. One indicator of social cohesion is the amount of social capital a person has. For example, a friend of a friend's employer has a job opening you apply for after learning about the opening from them. Social networks provide access to social capital and are sources of multiple forms of support. Consider emotional support when going through a difficult situation, or the instrumental and logistical support of having a neighbor who provides a ride to an appointment. Collective efficacy, an aspect of social capital and social cohesion, is grounded on mutual trust. For example, increasing tolerance and acceptance through changing social norms. Collective efficacy is associated with better self-rated health, lower rates of neighborhood violence, and better access to health-enhancing resources like medical care, healthy food options, and places to exercise. Social institutions like religious organizations and the family are common sources of social capital and social control, as well as social networks like hobby groups and social support. Social networks build social capital and transmit health behaviors and outcomes, a phenomenon known as social contagion. For example, if an individual's friend, sibling, or spouse is obese, the individual's likelihood of also becoming obese increases. This was commonly seen during the COVID-19 pandemic with masking behaviors and adherence to guidelines for best practices in preventing spread. Similar patterns are seen for smoking and alcohol consumption. On the flip side, social support may help people stick to healthier diets and reduce emotional stress, both of which affect cardiovascular, neuroendocrine, and immune system health. The protective nature of social support may be especially important for populations that experience discrimination or exclusion, which we explored in previous slides. One study of first-generation immigrants found that social support acted as a barrier against the harmful physical and mental health effects of discrimination. Older adults are particularly vulnerable to isolation as contact with friends decreases with age and ambulation and transportation requirements might be impaired or be an inhibiting factor to socialization. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the United States, said, "Given the significant health consequences of loneliness and isolation, we must prioritize building social connection the same way we have prioritized other critical public health issues such as tobacco, obesity, and substance use disorders. Together, we can build a country that's healthier, more resilient, less lonely, and more connected." That statement comes from an advisory released in May 2023 about the public health crisis of loneliness, isolation, and lack of connection in our country. These conditions increase the risk for adverse health outcomes. But there is a cure. Social connection can improve these outcomes. By strengthening social infrastructure, enacting pro-connection public policies, mobilizing the health sector, increasing internet access and reforming digital environments, and cultivating a culture of connection, we can intervene on this epidemic of loneliness. For more information about the Surgeon General's statement, see the link on this slide. At this point in the video, we've offered you opportunities to deepen your learning. You can click on each of the words in the white boxes below for perspectives, which offers articles or more videos, and case studies. Engage with each resource depending on your interest, then come back and continue the module. Please answer the following question by clicking the button next to the best answer. You must hit the Submit button to check your answer and move on to the next slide. Disconnection or loneliness can lead to what adverse health outcomes? A. Decreased risk of obesity. B. Decreased risk of dementia. C. Increased risk of heart disease. Culturally competent healthcare providers and organizations reduce administrative and linguistic barriers to patient care, tailoring their services to align with cultural norms, language preferences, and community needs. This helps to ensure care that is accessible, acceptable, and respectful. A culturally competent healthcare system can help improve health outcomes and quality of care and can contribute to the elimination of racial and ethnic health disparities. This is extremely important in a state like New Mexico, where the majority of the population are racial and ethnic minorities. This goes back to what we learned in Module 4, Healthcare Access and Quality, and the improved outcomes seen when patients can see a provider who shares their racial or ethnic background. As we've learned here and in the previous module, physician ethnicity matters when it comes to minority patients' health outcomes. As a majority minority state with a strong population of indigenous people, New Mexico's population is richly diverse, racially, ethnically, and culturally. As we've also learned, competence mitigates disparity. New Mexico's population is richly diverse. Our healthcare provider population should be too. We encourage you to take a few minutes to consider what you've learned. In the white box on this slide, respond to the following prompt. Physician ethnicity matters when it comes to minority patients' health outcomes. As a majority minority state with a strong population of indigenous people, New Mexico's population is richly diverse racially, ethnically, and culturally. Reflect on these two truths: the impact of patients and their providers sharing ethnicity, and the diversity of New Mexico's population, and spend time brainstorming ways to increase the diversity of healthcare professionals from your scholarly or professional framework. For example, educators may consider how to encourage minority students to pursue healthcare professions, while those in public transit or civil engineering will think about the best ways to improve transportation and access from minority communities to colleges and universities. When you finish typing, hit the Submit button to move on in the module. The high number of rural residing New Mexicans is a particular SDOH concern. People residing in rural areas are at an increased risk for social isolation and loneliness, and the accompanying mental and physical health risks. The majority of New Mexico is rural, and 32% of New Mexicans live in rural areas. More barriers to social connection include physical challenges of connecting, including issues with ambulation, transportation, and neighborhoods lacking walkability. Rural populations are more likely to face economic challenges that impact social connection as well. The average income of rural residing New Mexicans is less than $2,000. The poverty rate is 3% higher, and unemployment is 1% higher compared to urban areas. Limited internet access is another issue for much of the state. According to federal officials in 2023, 59% of the state doesn't have access to secure internet connection. Rural populations also have less access to health care, including mental and behavioral health care services. These risks are even higher for older adults in rural areas. 27.4% of New Mexicans age 65 and over live in rural counties. In the next module, we will talk about more ways that communities can develop healthy places to live and connect. As we've illustrated in this module, discrimination is intersectional, meaning BIPOC individuals often experience prejudice or unequal treatment based on the multiple intersecting aspects of their identities, such as race, gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, or socioeconomic status. For instance, people who identify as being two or more races are most likely to report any mental illness within the past year than any other race or ethnic group, followed by Native American, white, and African American individuals. Discrimination based on multiple identity aspects like age and gender can lead to amplified inequality and disadvantage. It can result in greater barriers to opportunities, resources, and social inclusion, as individuals may face cumulative biases and stereotypes that intersect across various dimensions of their identity. There is a strong need to implement policies that address social drivers of health, promote equitable access to health care, address systemic discrimination and inequality, and actively involve affected communities in decision-making processes. Such progress means investing in education, social programs like senior centers, affordable housing, broadband internet, income support, better transportation systems, and food security programs. Each community is unique in the degree and nature of its health inequities, as well as what resources they have access to in any given year. At the same time, all communities are experts in what they need and can work together to establish and drive greater community-based efforts toward health equity. In addition, we can pay attention to the social drivers of health for specific groups, including older adults, and work toward greater cultural competence, building knowledge of individual communities and an understanding of diversity and the various perspectives of all minority groups. Now that you have finished watching this video, make sure to take the corresponding quiz before moving on to Module 6.